Hi everyone, this is another one of our pastels. This is probably the second last class with oil pastels. So today we're doing, as you can see here, a fantasy forest. The first thing we're going to do that's a little different is we're going to do a red under sketch. So if you do painting, if you ever paint, it's kind of like the red under painting. So I'm going to take the red pastel and sketch in mostly just the trees in the front. And if you look at this picture, there's this tree on this side. We're going to pretend this does not exist. We're going to get rid of this because in the photo, it feels like this side is very, very dark and very heavy. So if we get rid of that and then just have this light come through, then this picture will be more balanced. All right, so the reason why we use red is it brings the warmth to our artwork. So when we do the red sketch, I just like using red and that makes the green stand out more. And it's better than just working on a plain white canvas. So I'm going to start with this tree over here. Just going to quickly and roughly outline where I think this is going to be. So right now we're just sketching with our red pastel. The shape does not have to be perfect. And later when you end up coloring over these lines, it'll create this almost warm effect. It'll make more sense when we see it. Let me just move it over here. And actually for this tree, we're going to shade in the trunk because when we go in with the background after this, it's a little bit more clear where things are. Sometimes I get confused if this is a tree or if this is just the background. I'm just lightly shading in the trunk with a red base. All right, and let's move on to, I'm going to sketch in this tree too. This one, the base is a little bit lower than this tree. So when we drag it down, go a little bit below this one. And for the base, you can just leave it. There's a little knob on the side, so you can capture that little organic shape. And make sure the bottom is nice and strong. And just as we did before, shade it in with the red base. Doesn't have to be too dark or too light. Just fill it in. I'm going row by row, but however you want to do it is okay. And just taper off like that. And usually with these forest paintings and forest drawings, we usually start with the background first, but today, because we're doing something different, we're putting the stuff in the foreground first. Then we're going to add the background at the same time. All right, and then now we can lightly sketch in the trees in the background. With these ones, you can just do the outline. We don't have to shade them in. Or if you want to shade them in, you can also do that. I tend to lose track of how many trees there are. So just add however many you want. There goes that. The goal is to just not have too many trees occupying the space because we still want that little bit of balance. As you can see here, I've kind of already ignored the picture. So this is kind of the foreground of the middle ground. And then now I'm doing the middle ground of the middle ground. So these trees are all on different levels, telling us how far away they are. I'm going to put a further away tree just in the back, and it's going to blend into this tree. Let's also put some on the side. And the top can fade off because there's leaves. So we will just leave it like that. I'm going to make this one a little bit lower. And although we're ignoring this tree that's kind of blocking the view here, I still want to add a background, a tree in the background, just to balance this side. So it's going to be a small little tree, maybe it splits off. All right, now I'm going to actually, before we put the red away, I'm just going to draw a line cutting across the bottom area here just to indicate the horizon. This is the horizon line, and this is basically where you see the land ending. And one final thing to do with the red sketch is I'm going to shade in some of these shadows. And I'm going to take my time with them, even in the sketch, because I need to know exactly where the trees are coming from, or where the shadow. So I'm going to hold the pastel on the side, flat, and just scratch it back and forth, dragging it in the direction of the shadow as I shade it back and forth. So just like this, and then have it taper off. Same with this tree, just lightly dragging the pastel all the way across. It's actually a little bit more flat and less angled, so I'm going to raise this end. And I'm going to pretend there's a tree over here and it's casting a shadow right in this corner, even though in the picture there is not. And the further away the shadows get, the thinner the shadows will become because they get further away. So I shake my hand less, I wiggle the pastel a little less. And remember, this is just the sketch, so we're not going to go too much into detail. I will now put the red away and slowly move into the next step, which is the background. So as we slowly move into our coloring, the next few colors we will need, there's actually a lot of colors we'll use, because if you look at my set of cut pastels, there's not a lot of range. We only have 12 colors, but if you have more colors, then maybe it'll be easier. This is a very ambiguous color. Actually, all of these are, which means if I put the blue here, it'll be way too blue. So we're going to use, once again, a combination of different colors. So the first one we'll need is we're going to work from the top to the bottom. And it's warmer on the top, and it becomes this blue-gray at the bottom. So for this top part, we'll obviously need some yellow, white, some peach, lime, and that should be it for now. If we think other colors might work, then we will add those. So these are the 4 colors just for the top part of the background. For this one, I'm going to clean off my colors first. Usually I don't really care if it's muddy, but because we want to achieve this misty effect and we want to create that contrast, our lighter colors, you have to try to make them as clean as possible. So that's why I'm just going to clean off the pastels as much as I can. And now we can move on to the next step. So the first thing that we need to do is I'm going to take the yellow and add a light swath of it in this upper half area. So on this painting would be over here. And just very, very lightly some yellow. It will be barely noticeable on camera, but I am adding some yellow. So take the yellow and just lightly apply some of it. Just barely scratching the surface. And it is okay if you get some red in the background, because we're not trying to get a pure yellow going on. And just have it taper off. So just a very light layer I've applied. And the next step we're going to do is I'm going to take this white. If you have a larger stub, then please use that. The smaller the pastels get, the more tiring it is for our hands. So I'm going to take the white and just blend out all of the yellow that I just put down. This will be our base. We can start to add more colors after we have blended all of the yellow out with the white. So I'm just pressing hard. Creating this almost egg wash color. The lighter, the better, because we want to create that contrast against the dark trees. Okay, so now that I've blended out all the yellow, I'm going to take some of this lime green and just add it. If you squint and look at this picture, there's 2 rows of leaves that stand out in particular, rows being how dark it is. So if I put my hand here, you can see that there's 1 row of leaves that somehow align. And then right underneath, there's also this lighter row of trees. We're not going to make rows, but just seeing that there's 2 main bodies of green color, it'll help us out when we color in the leaves. So I'm going to take the lime green. It'll be a little bit bright when we apply it, but I'm just scratching it, having little tiny shapes. I don't know what to call them, but I'm just moving my pastel back and forth and then applying some of it everywhere, but also keeping in mind that these are where the rows are. The reason why I do it like a little bit at a time is so that I can naturally create these holes in the leaves. And then without having to worry too much about exactly where the holes are, but wherever my pen seems to stop or wherever my pastel seems to stop, I'll leave this little empty space for the holes. There's this particularly bright area right here. So I'm going to go around that because I want to keep these highlights. So once again, we're still working on the base. This is not the final color. These are just where the leaves are going to be. And because we pretended that this tree did not exist, for this side you can just decide however many leaves you want. I'm going to leave it a little bit bare. So on this side, it's quite dark. So you can just honestly fill all of that in with some of this lime green. All right, so that's the base. For this upper part, because afterwards we're going to go in with a brown and just darken the leaves. This is just a base sketch. So we're not quite there. We're going to take our time and really just get the colors in before we get the values. So now I'm taking the yellow, and you see these lighter row of leaves because of the sunlight. We're going to do the same thing that we did with the lime and add some yellow just at the bottom, and also a little bit into the lime green, but not too much. So I'm going over some of the bottom ones and then also adding a few right below it. Okay, the next step is this blue-gray area at the bottom of the background. So before we add any blue, I'm going to take the peach color and just fill in this entire bottom area if you've left it blank. If you haven't, then you can also do this step. But basically, we're adding the base for the blue so that it won't be too saturated. So just adding a layer of peach where the blue is going to go. I like using peach because it mutes a lot of the colors that we tend to use, like blue or red or purple, so it's not too bright and intense. Okay, so I've added the peach, and with the blue, I'm going to add, I'm not going to press too hard, but I'm just going to shade, add a little bit at a time, and then blend it out using the white. So how that will look is, I like to just add a little bit of blue, and then blend it out, just to see how, if I like that color. And if you think it's okay, then we can continue. So I'm sketching in some of this blue. Putting a little bit more on this side simply because of how dark it is. So we want these cool tones at the bottom in the distance. Can help the forest look hazy or foggy. Then I'm going to blend it out with the white. And one thing I'm going to do to the blue is add an edge to the top of the blue area, because the reason why it's blue is because there's trees in the background and they're blurred. It's not just an empty space that goes into the distance, but those are actually really just blurry trees. When we use oil pastels, we can add a little bit of style by adding an edge at the top of our values or the areas. So basically, I'll create a hard edge just on the top, really roughly. So edge as in line. And then, so the top edge will be pretty sharp. But then I'm going to blend the bottom edge down. So we have a soft and hard edge. Just gonna add a little bit more blue. If you prefer a more blended look, then by all means, you do not have to do this part. Almost looks a little bit like mountains. All right, the next step before we move on to the darker trees trunks, the next step is going to just be us adding some yellow to the ground, kind of setting it there before we add any of the darker colors. So for the grass, if you remember from our very, very first class in oil pastels, the green is actually yellow and the dark green is a mix of red and green. So with the lighter areas here where the sunlight is, we're going to use yellow. So if you look at the sketch, everywhere that is not red, essentially, you're going to add the yellow for the grass. Just like that. You can press very hard or shade it in. Either way, we will layer it with some other colors. There's a little bit on this side. And there's a little bit in here too. I'm leaving this top part mostly empty. And slowly fade it off. You can actually put the yellow everywhere, simply because there is going to be yellow in the greens as well. And also because it's such a light color, can always go over it to darken it where we want to. So currently it's very bright. We will need to dull it down with our secondary colors, but not quite yet. All right, and now the next color I will use for the grass is, of course, lime. And this will go in the transition areas. So if you see this line over here, we're going to use lime green on both, and also especially in between these two values. So I will add a little bit of lime in the yellow here, and also in the shadow. And if you have the red sketch, when we mix it with the lime green, it will give us the color that we want. So I'm starting off the lime green a little bit in the trunk as well, because I want it to fade very smoothly into the grass. And for the very, very dark areas, the darker shadows, we're going to leave that alone, because sometimes when we use a lot of colors and the oil pastel builds up, then the dark colors won't be as dark anymore. So if we leave the paper empty and we add our darker colors, then it will not be too brightened by the previous colors. So I'm going back in the yellow and adding some of the slime green. And take your time with this step. Make sure that you're putting the colors and you're happy with where you're putting the colors. And for covering larger areas, you can just hold the pastel on the side and drag it across the paper and fill in the rest later. And when you're doing this step, be very careful to leave the lightest areas of the grass mostly empty. So don't use the green there, because we will lose the contrast. Okay, now we're going to darken the shadows, especially in this corner. We're going to take purple and some blue and maybe some red as well. These are our darkening colors. And so I'll show you how to do it. I tend to start with the purple and just test out the color, see if it's dark enough. And usually I'll continue with it. And you might be thinking, well, there's absolutely no purple in there, which is true at first glance, but I just like to use some cool colors for the shadows, so it gives us more depth. So that's me adding the purple. There's almost a little bit of a vignette going on in the corner over here. So I will darken this entire corner using some purple. All right. And with blue, we're going to do the same, but add a little bit more blue in the very darkest areas. Take some red as well. At this point, I'm mostly just experimenting with what would look good. A little bit more blue could do. Then I'm going to blend out this area. So drag the dark back into the lighter areas using the lime. I'm just dragging the color in there. It's not moving very much, but we can always add more of these darker colors. Okay, I'll do the same with this shadow, but mostly just near the base. So I'm taking the purple and adding some purple to the base of the shadow. Notice how I slowly add less and less. We could also use brown, but I want to leave that color for the trunks, for the trees of the trunks. If we use brown for the shadow, it'll just look like one strip of brown. And we want to keep the distinction between the grass and the trunk. You can pretty much add this purple anywhere now, but especially where the shadow starts. As the shadow fades away, it's not that dark anymore because there's other light making it brighter. So it's mostly darker at the very, very bottom or at the base of the tree. And then blend it out using the lime green. Not too much, because once again, we still want to keep the brightest area. We can also darken this corner, just like how we did this one. Taking the purple. And for this corner, I like to just drag it down first. And there's also one thing I forgot to mention. There's little holes in the ground where the mud peeks through the grass. Do that just by holding the purple sideways, making a few flat indentations here and there. But be careful not to make it look like a shadow. Sometimes that does happen, but it's okay if that happens. Now I'm going to darken this entire corner. And blend it with the lime green. And because the grass is going up and down, it's quite short grass, I'm also going to mimic the growth of the grass and just basically copy it using the brush strokes. So I'm going up and down as I blend, up and down and down. Going to add a little bit more purple here because you see this green is kind of sloping down. And this part on here is a little too bright. So I'm going to take the purple and drag a little bit of color down this way. Okay, and the final step before we move on to the trees is I'm going to fill in all these holes. If you don't have holes, then you can just continue doing the grass. But I have some little white holes, which is just the paper peeking through, and I'm going to lock those in with the white. So if you see these tiny little marks, I'm going to fill it all in. But first I must clean off the white. Okay, now let's move on to the trees and also the leaves. So I'm going to put most of these colors away. I'm going to put low away, but then I'm going to keep purple and brown and peach. I should take the lime back. So we only need these four colors. We need purple, peach, brown, and lime green. So I'm going to start to simply add some brown, fill in the darkest trunks. And on mine, these two are going to be my darkest. Going to take the brown and start filling in the tree. And making sure that the brown hits the edge and touches the background. So we don't want any empty space. And do the same with the other tree. Just fill it all in. And you may also naturally just do this, but as you drag the edge down, I rotate the pastel just to get a cleaner edge after the edge I just used comes a little bit more rounded, just like using a pencil. So right now my edge on this side is very, very sharp, but I'm going to rotate it to get a sharper edge again. Just a little random technique you can use. So after those, these darkest trees are colored in. For the trees in the background, they are a little bit lighter. So how are we going to achieve that color? Basically, we're going to use the same technique. We use the peach to set as a base, and then also some blue and lime green. We may not use blue, but usually as trees get further away, they'll become more blue because it's colder in the distance, because warmer things pop out and cooler tones recede. So I'm going to take the lime green and actually lime green and peach and fill in the trunks of the trees in the background. It will not be the correct color just yet, but you'll see what we can do with it. So first peach, then lime, then a little bit of brown, and maybe blue. So these four colors are for the trees in the background. So peach first. So now they're pink. And then once again, second color we're going to layer on top of that is lime green. I'm actually going to try out how the regular dark green looks. So not quite sure how I feel about this, but I think the dark green would be better than the lime. So we're going to replace our lime green with the dark green. So going over the same area we just colored with the peach. So we're setting the base for the trees in the back. Okay, and then we're going to go in with the brown right on top of this muted green here. And I'm not pressing too hard because later we will blend it out using a lighter color. The reason why we did that is because trees in the front are much darker, and if we only use brown, then it would look as if they were all the same distance away from us. So when we layer all these different colors, we get a lighter brown, and it kind of helps the trees appear further away. And I will add some blue to the trees, most in the background. So there's this tiny stump here. Just adding some blue. Make them appear a little bit colder and further away. Add some blue over here as well, just a little bit. We're not trying to get or replace the brown. We're adding some blue right on top of that. And you can blend out the blue using a peach. At this point, because of how many colors we already have, it won't blend that much, but it'll smooth out some of these chunkies. All right, now let's move on to one of the final steps is we're going to first darken the trunks. And secondly, we're going to add some of these leaves. So bring out the texture. So to darken this brown, we will use black. And usually I don't use black, but because this is a fairly muted image, so it's not too vibrant, we can use black. It also helps with the haze. So where are we going to put the black? Mostly around the edges, especially on the right side. It'll help the tree stand out against the background. So I'm not going to fill all of it in. I'm just shading it and fading when I reach the middle. So I'm starting from the edge with the black and then fading it inwards. Just bringing it to the center of the tree. And this will not be the only color we will use to darken the trees. We might also use some blue, some purple, maybe green, who knows. And because the trunk isn't perfectly smooth, you can also add some random lines and bumps here and there. And also there's some grooves and curves, some edges at the bottom because of the roots. And remember, the light is coming in from the top right. Going to do the same with this tree. And for this one, for this tree, it's a little bit different how we add the black. I don't really start immediately on the edge, but more a little bit inwards. So the darkest areas will be almost in the middle. We're leaving a little bit of this brown peeking on the side because it's the light that's refracting. Same thing with the sphere. The bottom of the sphere is bright or not always, but if the table is very bright, then it will catch the light bouncing off the table, light bouncing off the grass. Same concept. Okay, as you're doing that, the next two colors we'll use to finish off the trunks will be yellow and blue. So yellow is because we want to simulate that sunlight coming through, and blue is just to make the trunks less red, because if you compare these two, this one's a little bit more green gray. So we're going to use some blue, kind of blend out the black. You can also use some lime green if you feel. So a combination of these three colors on the trunk. I use blue because the green doesn't really show up. And also we use blue because we want to bring more attention to the yellow in the ground. So if we used green, the trunk too much, then color-wise, everything will blend together. And I'm not going to blend all of this out because we want the texture, because tree trunks are not smooth. Then I will take the yellow and just along the edge over here, add a little bit of that yellow. Only the edge, not too much in the center. Mostly around the edge of the tree, because that's where the light is peeking through, not through the middle of the trunk. It's on the edges. All right, and we're going to slowly move into the last step. So I see that we're slowly running out of time. Today was a little bit long. We're going to move into the leaves. So the leaves, I'm going to take brown first and just scratch in very organically some of these leaves. So remember when we first put the green down, this very light lime green, we're going to go over that very, very roughly. It's kind of squiggling the pastel. So as you're doing this, just imagine that every squiggle is a group of leaves. So kind of like a batch of leaves. Not worrying too much about each individual leaf, because that would just take too much time. And the leaves get a little less grouped together at the bottom. And to just give a little bit more variation to these leaves over here, I think I'm going to take some lime and just go over some of these leaves. Mostly I'm just blending out some of the harsher marks, or the getting rid of some texture. And there's one more thing actually, is these leaves that are sticking out in the front. So if you see these particular darker branches, we can take some black. Oh, and also in this corner, of course, take some black and do the same thing that we did with the brown and the squiggling, but it's going to go right on top. And that is the end of today's drawing. How did everyone do? I think it was a little hard today because of how many different colors we had to use. Veronica, very good.